For 5 years he'd gotten very good at being alone, not happily, competently. He'd learned to cook the three things that keep a man alive without thinking, learned to sleep without reaching for someone who wasn't there, learned to fill his hours with work that needed no one else. Then one Monday morning, the smell of cinnamon came through his kitchen window, and a retired sheriff who'd stopped expecting the day to hold anything he hadn't already anticipated put on his coat and walked outside to find. At Y. Redbud Creek, Texas, 1885. What Warren Slate didn't know that morning is that the woman putting up a bakery sign next door was about to give him a reason to pick his badge back up out of a drawer he'd sworn he'd closed for good. Because 3 weeks later, $3,000 in stolen gold and a young man wrongly accused of taking it were going to land squarely between him and the only good thing that had happened to him in half a decade. Stay to the end. The man behind that theft has run this town for 20 years without anyone able to prove it until now. Warren Slate had lived alone 5 years and had gotten very good at it. Not happily, competently, he'd learned to cook the three things that kept a man alive without much thought, learned to sleep without reaching for someone who wasn't there, learned to fill the hours with the kind of work that didn't require another person. His wife Vivian had died of typhoid fever in the summer of 1880. The disease had moved through Redbud Creek by way of contaminated wells, a failure of infrastructure a growing Texas town hadn't yet addressed, the doctor explained afterward. Vivian had been sick on a Monday. By Friday, she was gone. The doctor said it was nobody's fault. Warren hadn't found that comforting. He'd retired his badge the following spring, 23 years as sheriff of Redbud Creek County, long enough to know where every skeleton in the county was buried and who had put it there. He'd handed the badge to his deputy Reeves, walked home, and had been walking between his house and the general store and back ever since. He was 63 years old, and he'd stopped expecting the day to contain anything he hadn't already anticipated. Then, on a Monday morning in April, he woke to the smell of cinnamon coming through his kitchen window. He stood at the window in his undershirt and looked at the building next door, which had sat empty 2 years and which he'd stopped noticing the way you stop noticing empty things, and saw lamplight inside, a woman moving behind the glass with the focused energy of someone who has somewhere to be and knows it. A sign was going up over the door. He couldn't read it from the window. He put on his coat. He went outside. Lewis's Bakery, the sign said in neat, careful letters. Standing on the boardwalk below it, adjusting the last nail with a hammer she was using with complete confidence, was a woman with white hair and a flour-dusted apron, and the expression of someone arriving somewhere they'd been planning to arrive for a long time. Warren stood on the boardwalk and looked at the sign and thought, well, that changes things. She'd come from Abilene. Warren learned from Jed at the general store, who'd learned it from the man who sold her the building, who'd apparently talked to her 45 minutes and come away with the impression that Louisa Bennett was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and wasn't interested in being told otherwise. Her husband Thomas had died 3 years back, a writing accident, quick and final, the kind that leaves no time for anything except the after. She'd run the household accounts 20 years and had been baking since she was 8, and after 3 years of figuring out what came next, decided what came next was a bakery in Redbud Creek. Because Redbud Creek had no bakery and she'd always wanted one, and Thomas would have told her to go ahead. She was 57. She had a son named Marcus who'd come ahead of her 6 months earlier to work at the lumberyard, and who had, according to Jed, been considerably less enthusiastic about the bakery plan than his mother. Warren filed all of this and went home. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon came through his window again at 6. He stood a moment. Then, without particularly deciding to, put on his coat and went next door. The bakery wasn't yet open. The sign said 7, but the door was unlocked, light inside, the smell considerably better up close. He knocked on the open door. Louisa Bennett looked up from behind the counter with the expression of a woman in the middle of something and going to finish it before she addressed an interruption. She finished it. She looked at him. Warren Slate, he said. I live next door. I smelled the cinnamon. She looked at him a moment with amber eyes that assessed things quickly and completely. It's not 7 yet, I know. He held up a jar, the last of the honey from the Mercer farm, which he'd been rationing since October, because once it was gone, it was gone. I brought this. She looked at the honey, looked at him, picked up a cinnamon roll from the rack, put it on a plate, set it on the counter. Sit down, Mr. Slate. Coffee will be ready in 5 minutes. He sat down, he ate the cinnamon roll. It was the best thing he'd eaten in 5 years. He didn't say this out loud because saying it out loud would have required explaining why, and he wasn't prepared for that on a Tuesday morning. He left the honey on the counter and went home. He was back at 7 the next morning. It became a routine without anyone deciding it would. 7 o'clock, Tuesday through Saturday, the same stool at the end of the counter closest to the window, the same order, black coffee. One cinnamon roll delivered without asking after the third morning, because Louisa Bennet paid attention to what people wanted and didn't make them repeat themselves. They talked not about large things at first, about Redbud Creek, which Warren knew the way of someone who'd spent 23 years of it professionally, in which Louisa was learning the way of someone who'd just arrived. She asked specific questions rather than general ones, which Warren appreciated. Not what's the town like asterisk, but who do I need to know at the bank? Is the man at the lumberyard honest? He told her what he knew. He learned things about her in return, baking since her grandmother taught her at 8, could tell by smell alone when bread was 30 seconds from done. Strong opinions about cinnamon from a tin versus cinnamon from the whole stick she ground herself. One Thursday you were the sheriff here, 23 years, why did you stop? He looked at his coffee. My wife died and I found I didn't have the patience for it anymore. She refilled his coffee without asking. My husband died 3 years ago, riding accident, I know. Jed told me. A slight expression crossed her face he couldn't entirely read. Jed talks a great deal. He does, Warren said. He told me you came from Abilene, that you knew what you were doing and weren't interested in being told otherwise. She looked at the counter, then back at him. He's not wrong. Warren drank his coffee. No, he said, I can see that. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that arrived without announcement and changed her entire face. And Warren Slate, who hadn't smiled before 8 in the morning in 5 years, found that he was smiling now. Marcus Bennet found out his mother was having coffee with the former sheriff every morning on a Wednesday in May, heard it from the lumberyard foreman, who'd heard it from someone else. He arrived at the bakery at 7 with his arms already crossed. Louisa was behind the counter. Warren was on his stool. The morning had been pleasant. Marcus looked at Warren. Warren looked at Marcus. Louisa looked at both of them with the expression of a woman who's been a mother 32 years and recognizes the specific quality of a situation that's about to require management. Marcus, this is Warren Slate. He lives next door. I know who he is. Marcus's eyes stayed on Warren. Mr. Slate, Marcus, Warren said. Mama, can I speak with you? You're speaking with me now. She put a cinnamon roll on a plate and slid it across to Marcus. Sit down. Marcus sat. He didn't touch the cinnamon roll. Louisa talked about the morning's bread. Marcus asked questions about the bakery accounts that were clearly not about the bakery accounts. Warren drank his coffee and said nothing, which was what the situation required. When he stood to go, he put his money on the counter and nodded to Marcus. Good to meet you. He meant it. Marcus nodded once, all he was willing to give. Walking home, Warren thought, that boy is not protecting his mother from me. He's protecting her from losing someone again. He remembered being 32 and afraid, not of the same things, but afraid in the same way, with the same inability to name it correctly. He didn't hold it against Marcus. He simply noted it and kept going to the bakery every morning because the cinnamon rolls were ready at 7, and Louisa Bennet was behind the counter. And those two facts together were worth considerably more than a young man's crossed arms. Redbud Creek noticed Warren Slate on a stool at Louisa Bennet's counter within the week and discussed it within the fortnight. Martha at the dry goods store said he looked better than he had in years. Reverend Cole said it was good to see him getting out. Cornelius Vane said something at the bank Warren didn't hear directly, but that Jed reported, that it seemed a little late in the day for the old sheriff to be making social calls, delivered in the tone of a man who considers himself a wit. Warren had known Cornelius Vane 23 years. He did not like Cornelius Vane. This was the accumulated feeling of a man who'd spent 2 decades watching someone operate at the edges of legality, with enough intelligence to stay just inside the line. Vane ran the Redbud Creek Savings Bank, sat on the town council, had donated the clock in the church tower, and was respected by everyone who hadn't spent 23 years watching him. The mining claim dispute of 1879 that resolved in Vane's favor after the other man inexplicably dropped his case. The cattle operation that folded 2 years back, Vane acquiring the property at a price bearing no relationship to what the land was worth. 2 unexplained deposits at the bank in amounts that didn't correspond to any transaction Warren could trace. 23 years of watching, never enough evidence. He thought about these things on the walk home from the bakery, then stopped thinking about them because he was retired and it wasn't his job anymore. He thought about them again briefly in November, when a Wells Fargo agent came through Redbud Creek asking quiet questions about a gold shipment route that would pass through the county the following summer. He filed this without deciding to. The habit of 23 years didn't stop just because the badge was in a drawer. What Warren didn't yet understand that autumn was that Cornelius Vane had also noticed the pattern of a retired sheriff spending every morning in a bakery with a clear line of sight to the bank's front door and the comings and goings of its business, and that a man who'd spent 20 years staying just inside the line of the law did not care for that kind of attention, however innocent its actual purpose. It started small, the way these things usually did. In early December, a man from the town's licensing office, a cousin of one of Vane's tellers, Jed later confirmed, came by the bakery to inform Louisa that her business permit, filed properly in April, appeared to have an irregularity in the paperwork that would need correcting before the new year, or the bakery would need to close its doors pending review. "There's no irregularity," Louisa told Warren that evening, setting the notice on his kitchen table, her hands steadier than her voice. "I filed everything the way the clerk told me to file it." "I have the receipt." Warren read the notice twice. He recognized the particular flavor of bureaucratic threat, vague enough to sound official, specific enough to cost a woman weeks of worry and a lawyer's fee she couldn't easily spare. "This isn't about your paperwork," he said. "This is about who's been sitting at your counter every morning looking at the bank across the street. You think Vane did this. I know Vane did this. I don't have it in writing yet." He set the notice down carefully. "This is what he does. He doesn't threaten a man directly. He finds the thing that man cares about and puts a small, deniable weight on it, just enough to see if the man moves." Louisa was quiet a moment. "And if you keep sitting at my counter, then he'll find something heavier to put on it eventually," Warren said. "I won't pretend otherwise. That's not a reason for me to stop coming. It's a reason to be careful about what I hand him to use." She looked at him a long moment, amber eyes assessing, the way they always did. "I didn't move 300 miles and put every dollar I had into that building to close it over a paperwork threat from a man I've never even met." "No," Warren agreed. "I didn't think you would." He walked the notice down to the county clerk's office himself the next morning before the bakery opened and asked to see the original filing. It was, as Louisa said, entirely in order, filed correctly, receipt on record, nothing irregular about it at all. He had the clerk write him a formal letter confirming as much and left a copy on Louisa's counter before 7, with no note, because by then neither of them needed one. The licensing matter quietly resolved itself within the week, and nobody at the bank mentioned it again, which told Warren less about Vane's guilt in that particular matter than it told him about Vane's habits generally. Test the weight. See if it moves anything, withdraw cleanly if it doesn't, and remember exactly who didn't flinch. The Wells Fargo shipment came through Redbud Creek on a Thursday in July, $3,000 in gold coin bound for the mining operation north of town. Not a secret, shipments through county seats rarely were, but the kind of thing that moved quietly with an escort through town and out again, it did not move quietly. The escort was ambushed 2 miles north of town. The gold was taken. One Wells Fargo man was shot, not killed, but badly enough that he was brought back to Redbud Creek unconscious. By Friday morning, Reeves had a suspect. Warren heard it from Jed, who arrived at his porch carrying news he found significant and uncomfortable. They arrested Marcus Bennett. Warren looked at him. He was seen near the North Road Thursday afternoon. 2 witnesses. Who are the witnesses? Jed told him. Warren knew both names. One worked at Cornelius Vane's bank. The other owed Vane money, significant money, the kind that creates obligations. Warren sat on his porch after Jed left and didn't move for a long time. He thought about the mining claim dispute of 1879, the cattle operation, the 2 unexplained deposits, the Wells Fargo agent asking quiet questions in November about a shipment route Vane, as the receiving bank would have known in detail. He thought about a licensing notice that had resolved itself the moment it was challenged. He thought about 2 witnesses whose names he recognized and a 32-year-old man who didn't like Warren and had made that clear, currently sitting in Reeves's jail. He went inside. He went to the back room, he opened the drawer, he looked at the revolver and the badge a long moment, then he put on his coat. He was at his kitchen table at 10 that night when the knock came. He knew who it was before he opened the door. Louisa Bennett stood on his porch in her good coat, the one she wore to church, which meant she'd come in a hurry and grabbed what was nearest. Her white hair wasn't entirely pinned. Her amber eyes had the specific quality of someone who'd been crying and had stopped because there was something more urgent than crying. He stepped back from the door. "Come in, mind the step." She sat at his kitchen table. He put the kettle on because the kettle was something to do while she found the words. She told him what she knew, what Reeves had told Jed, the official version. Marcus seen near the North Road, 2 witnesses, the gold unaccounted for. Reeves was a decent man doing his job, and the evidence as presented was sufficient. She told him she knew Marcus hadn't done it. Not with certainty, with the knowledge of a mother who knows her son's particular kind of trouble and what it looked like, and this was not it. Warren poured the tea, sat across from her. "I know the witnesses," he said. "Both of them have connections to Cornelius Vane. One works at his bank. One owes him more money than he can repay." She was very still. Marcus was in the wrong place. Vane needed someone to be in the wrong place, and Marcus provided it. "Can you prove that?" "Not yet. But I know where to look." She looked at her hands on the table. "Warren, I know you're retired. I know Marcus has been." She stopped. "He hasn't been kind to you." "No. And I'm asking you anyway." He looked at her across his kitchen table. He stood, went to the back room, came back with 2 things, the revolver, cleaned and loaded, and the badge Reeves had offered to return 3 times, which Warren had declined 3 times and kept in the drawer anyway. He set them both on the table, looked at them a moment. Thought about Vivian, who died of typhoid fever in the summer of 1880, who told him once, when he was considering whether to run for a 3rd term, that the law wasn't the only reason he did the work, that he did it because he couldn't help himself. Because something in him was built for reading situations and finding what was wrong and setting it right. She hadn't meant it as a criticism. "I'll start in the morning," he said. He started with the Wells Fargo man. Jesse Calder was conscious by Saturday morning, not well, but conscious, in the specific state of someone who's survived something serious and hasn't yet decided what to do with the surviving. Warren sat beside his bed at Doc Alum's office and asked the questions he'd been asking 23 years, the ones that went sideways at the right angles. Calder remembered one thing that hadn't made it into the official account. The men who took the gold had known the route, not the general route, the specific stopping point. That information had been in the Wells Fargo Company manifest and in the communication between the company and the receiving bank, Cornelius Vane's bank. Warren went to the first witness, the man who owed Vane money. Went as Warren Slate, who'd known this man 20 years, sat on his porch and talked about nothing consequential 30 minutes before asking, in the tone of a man asking about the weather, whether the debt to Vane had been adjusted recently. The man's face answered before his mouth did. The second witness was harder. He worked at the bank, had more to lose. Warren went instead to the man's wife, who'd grown up in Redbud Creek and had known Vivian Slate, and who sat with Warren in her kitchen and listened to what he wasn't quite saying and understood it, and told him where her husband had actually been Thursday afternoon. It was not near the North Road. He spent Sunday looking for the gold itself, not because he expected to find it, but because a man who takes $3,000 in gold coin has to move it, and moving it leaves marks. He found the marks, not the gold, the specific disturbance of the ground behind the Vane property, fresh-cut lumber in the equipment shed at the bank, the kind used for crating. A conversation between two of Vane's men, overheard from a position Warren had learned about in 1871. By Sunday evening, he had enough not to convict that required a judge and a process, but enough to take to Reeves. He'd sent a writer to Judge Whitfield in Presidio Saturday morning before he'd even talked to the witnesses, because 23 years of this work had taught him that preparation wasn't presumption. It was respect for the people who needed the outcome. Reeves was not a corrupt man. Warren had known this 23 years, had chosen Reeves specifically because he wasn't corrupt. Reeves was decent and methodical, had made the arrest of Marcus Bennett in good faith on the evidence presented. When Warren laid the evidence on Reeves's desk Sunday evening, Reeves listened without interrupting. He was quiet a long time after. The witnesses, Warren said, one was coerced by the debt. The other was in Abilene Thursday. His wife will testify to it. The gold moved from behind the Vane property. The crating lumber's in the equipment shed at the bank. You'll need a warrant. You'll need a warrant. Vane's on the town council. He donated the church clock. I know. Reeves looked at Warren with the expression of a man measuring what he's being asked to do and finding it large but not impossible. I'll need a day. The judge, Judge Whitfield's in Presidio. He can be here Tuesday. I sent a writer Saturday morning. Reeves looked at him. Before I talked to the witnesses, Reeves was quiet a moment. Warren. You should have been sheriff another 20 years. Warren looked at the badge on his coat, the one he'd taken from the drawer. No, he said, I should have been home with Vivian. He stood. I'll be at the bakery Tuesday morning. If you need me. He walked back down Main Street in the Sunday evening dark and thought about what it felt like to pick up something you'd put down and find it still fit. Judge Whitfield arrived Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, with the warrant executed, the crating lumber found, and the first witness recanting under the pressure of a federal judge's questions. Cornelius Vane was in the cell where Marcus Bennett had been. Marcus stood on the boardwalk outside the jail in the Texas afternoon and looked at Redbud Creek. Warren was at the bakery. He'd gone back to his stool because it was Wednesday and that was where he went on Wednesday, and his part was done. The door opened. Marcus came in, stood a moment looking at his mother, then at Warren on his stool. Then at the counter where his own untouched cinnamon roll had sat 3 mornings while he watched the man he'd been trying to move away from his mother's mornings. He sat 2 stools from Warren, then moved 1 stool closer. I know what you did, he said. Reeves did the work. Reeves had the evidence you found. He looked at the counter. I've been watching you come here every morning, waiting for the thing I thought you were after. He looked at Warren directly. You weren't after anything. I was having coffee, Warren said. And a cinnamon roll. Marcus looked at his mother doing something behind the counter that didn't require the attention she was giving it, then back at Warren. She was happy before with my father. And then she wasn't. For a long time, she wasn't. His voice was steady. His hands on the counter were not entirely. I didn't want to watch that happen again. I know, Warren said. That's why I didn't push. Marcus nodded once. He looked at the cinnamon roll Louisa had put in front of him. He ate it. It was quiet in the bakery a few minutes, the comfortable kind. Mr. Slate, Marcus said. Warren. Marcus looked at him, then nodded, a different nod from the first Wednesday morning, the one that had been all he was willing to give. This one was something closer to the beginning of a different thing. Warren, he said. Louisa refilled both their cups without comment, and the 3 of them sat in the bakery on a Wednesday afternoon in Redbud Creek, Texas, and the morning that had started 5 years ago. When Warren had stopped being able to reach for someone who wasn't there, was beginning very quietly to become something else. Warren asked Louisa Bennet to marry him on a Thursday morning in September. He did it at the end of his usual visit, standing at the door with his hat in his hands, the same way he'd stood at her door the first morning, the morning with the honey jar. He asked simply. She said yes before he finished the sentence, which she told him afterward she'd been ready to do since approximately the Thursday in June when he'd sat at her counter while Marcus stared at him and said nothing that wasn't true. They married in October in the Redbud Creek Church under Cornelius Vane's donated clock, which the town council was discussing whether to remove, a conversation Warren watched with the mild interest of a man who no longer had a vote in such things but still had opinions. Marcus stood beside his mother at the ceremony with the expression of a man who'd arrived somewhere he didn't expect to arrive and found it better than where he started. Louisa wore the blue dress she'd bought in Abilene for an occasion that had never come. Warren wore his good coat. He stood at the altar and watched her walk toward him and thought about a Monday morning in April, the smell of cinnamon, a sign he'd walked outside to read. He thought about Vivian, who'd died of typhoid fever in 1880, who'd loved him 22 years, who would have told him with the directness she always had. That standing still wasn't the same as being faithful to her memory. He thought about a badge in a drawer and a 32-year-old man who'd moved one stool closer. She reached the altar. She took his hand. He held it the way you hold something you didn't expect to have again and aren't going to waste. They didn't move. Louisa kept the bakery. Warren kept the house next door. The arrangement was that they were together, which meant he was at the bakery in the mornings and she was at the house in the evenings, and neither of them needed to explain this to anyone, because it was simply what worked. Marcus came for coffee Wednesday mornings, not every Wednesday, most of them. He sat one stool from Warren, the distance that had settled naturally after the afternoon he'd moved closer. They talked about lumberyard business and Redbud Creek news, and sometimes about nothing specific. The way men talk when they've established that they don't need to perform their relationship for an audience. Redbud Creek recovered from the Vane affair with the practical speed of a town that has other business to attend to. Reeves built a case that took most of the year. The clock in the church tower kept ticking. The town council decided to keep it because it was a good clock and the clock itself had done nothing wrong. Warren agreed with this. On an evening the autumn of the following year, sitting on the porch of the house that was now both of theirs, Warren and Louisa watched Redbud Creek settle into the Texas evening. The smell of the day's bread was still in the air. Marcus had come that morning and stayed an hour and a half, longer than usual, and had talked about a woman at the general store he'd been noticing. Louisa had said nothing that wasn't encouraging. Warren had said nothing at all, which was the most useful thing available. "He's going to be all right," Louisa said. "Yes," Warren said. "Were you?" He looked at her. He said. She looked at him with the amber eyes that assessed things quickly and completely. Then looked at Redbud Creek settling into the evening, at the bakery sign visible from the porch, at the house that had been silent 5 years and wasn't silent anymore. "So am I," she said. He took her hand. She held it. That same week, the licensing notice from December, the one Vane's people had sent to shake Louisa loose from her own morning routine, came up unexpectedly in conversation. When the new bank president, a careful young man brought in from Austin to clean up what Vane had left behind, stopped by the bakery to introduce himself and mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd found the old irregular filing note in the bank's records while sorting through Vane's papers, and wanted Louisa to know officially, on bank letterhead this time, that there had never been anything wrong with her paperwork at all. Louisa read the letter, laughed once, short and surprised, and pinned it to the corkboard behind her counter, right beside the original clerk's letter Warren had walked over the very same week. 2 pieces of paper a year apart, saying the same true thing twice, which struck her, she told Warren that evening, as a fairly accurate description of most of what had happened to either of them since the spring, the truth taking its time but arriving all the same and worth keeping once it did. Warren Slate had gotten very good at living alone, not happily, competently. He'd learned to cook the 3 things that kept a man alive. Learned to sleep without reaching for someone who wasn't there. Learned to fill the hours with work that didn't require another person. 5 years. Then on a Monday morning in April, the smell of cinnamon came through his kitchen window. He put on his coat, he went outside, he read the sign, he brought the honey jar, he sat down. That is the whole of it. A man who'd stopped expecting the day to contain anything he hadn't already anticipated, and a woman who opened a bakery next door and made cinnamon rolls at 6 in the morning. And a jar of honey that was the last of what he'd been rationing since October, because once it was gone, it was gone. He could have stayed inside, he'd gotten very good at staying inside. But the honey jar was on the counter, and the coffee was ready in 5 minutes. And something in him, the part that had spent 23 years reading situations and deciding what they required, read this one and made the only correct assessment available. He sat down, he stayed. And the rest was cinnamon rolls and Wednesday mornings and a badge picked up from a drawer for a reason that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with love. And a man who moved one stool closer and a Texas evening on a porch that was not silent anymore. The heart does not know what age it is. It has never been informed that certain chapters close. Sit down, stay.